Hi, I'm Kevin Drinkall.
Hi, and I'm Michel Nicolai, and we welcome you to Zyzel Networks podcast.
We've been in the network industry for over 15 years, and in these podcasts we want to try and untangle the world of networking, debunk some of those myths, explain some real-world examples along the way, to help you make better choices about selecting the right tech, product, and even help you guys build faster, more reliable, scalable networks, or just to keep your kids happy at home.
Hi, and welcome back to another podcast. And today we're going to talk about delivering connectivity to a warehouse. So we're going to cover some of the pitfalls, the challenges, what to look out for, some of the features that maybe could work in Zyzel's products that will help you in this type of deployment. Of course, we're not going to cover everything. It's such a vast topic, right?
Yeah, but we see it often. Yeah, it's a daily question that we get here at Zyzel. Can you help us to make a network deployment for a warehouse? Because there are some challenges in the warehouse to do the deployment. And today we want to go through our products that you can use and how to use them to build such a network for your warehouse.
Okay, so let's walk it backwards, right? So let's talk from the gateway side of things, because I think most people start Wi-Fi, right? But
at the end, it starts also always with the gateway, because there is your internet connection, yeah? So that's your base where you want to start, of course. So selecting the right firewall with a proper UTM functionality, with the appliances there, with some VPN connectivity, because probably you want to connect up to some branches to get connected to them as well. And especially with the features that you have in the UTM, you can make sure that your network keeps clean for all kinds of traffic you don't want to have in your network.
So, for example, I would say when you're deploying these types of networks, especially in a warehouse, like Michel said, you probably want to keep it very clean so that you restrict very clearly what's going on to what part of the network, which means segregating the network into VLANs, which is a virtual LAN, which allows you to segregate the traffic into different components. We won't go into the great detail about that. We make some assumptions that this is something that you know how to do. But really important factor is that you do look at how you segregate the network. And, often we'll see like the barcode scanners or the POS system or the picking system will be on one network, the CCTV on another, maybe the office, the guest network, they're all kind of segregated against each other. And, the voice network as well also being segregated. So this allows you to keep all this traffic very clean and very segregated, especially in this type of environment, because it can get pretty complicated very quickly, right? So,
yeah, and also the NIS2 directive coming up, and you need to be ready for that as well. So with the firewall in place, with the applications running, as we mentioned, the clean network and the segregation of your VLANs and your applications that are running on those VLANs, you want to content filter maybe some of your traffic, or maybe you want to cut out certain kind of traffic. So based on applications, you want to cut off or completely get rid of. And those are things that you really need if you want to comply to the NIS2 directive, where you are responsible for as a reseller.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot to go over with the security side of things. And what I would suggest is the very basic top level is that you should consider UTM, because you need to look at A, protecting your network, and B, adding some kind of control mechanism into what devices are on the network. And we'll cover some of that in some of the other segments as well. But this is a real key to it. And, the content filtering application, like Michel mentioned, is really, really critical to that approach. Of course, the basic stuff like DHCP and all that sort of stuff can be also maintained from the firewall as well.
I think what is the best solution is when you take the firewall on board, that you also take control of your network, preferably by using a cloud controller based solution like Nebula, so that you can configure, you can monitor, you can easily deploy your devices when you're running such kind of application. So I think also Nebula can play a big role in this to help you to build up such a network.
So if we move on from the firewall, we then obviously go into the switch. Now, the switch component is very variable because it depends on how big your warehouse is, right? We've done massive installations in large cold stores, for example, to small little warehouses, etc.
But you talk about segregation, so also that means that your switch need to be enabled to deliver VLANing. Yeah, so a proper layer 2 switch is really appropriate in such kind of scenario.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and then obviously we go on to the types of traffic, right? So you could be looking at CCTV traffic, broadcasting traffic. You could be looking at voice traffic, okay? And when we go into the VLANs, also some tools that may help you as well is within our ecosystem, within Nebula, for example. Obviously, we have voice VLAN, like most manufacturers have a voice VLAN where it prioritizes the voice traffic. But we also have something called a vendor-based VLAN.
Yeah, it gives you much more flexibility, not only to put in one VLAN only, but to segregate in multiple VLANs as well.
Yeah, and based on the product. So, for example, if you were deploying something like a Samsung CCTV camera, you could put in the first 6 digits of the MAC address, which is basically the OUI.
Yeah, that's how we call it, yeah, OUI.
Yeah, and that basically allows us to identify that manufacturer. And what you can say is when that device is plugged in, it goes directly into a VLAN. So it doesn't matter what port actually you plug it into, it will always deliver it into that VLAN.
And secure, of course, because you know that your device will only operate in that specific VLAN, yeah. So you, as a guest user or an office user, you come not across a scanner or a CCTV camera because your network is segregated.
I mean, very, very useful tool as well. Another very common mistake or common thing that happens in these types of environments, and believe me, it's not the IT guys, right, ever. It's always the people working in the factory for some reason. They often plug the switch into itself, creating a loop, right? So it's like number one thing that happens all the time.
And luckily, we have some features to protect your switch again. The loop guard protection. You can easily switch on to make sure that your switch is protected against these kind of mistakes that obviously happen. Yeah.
So in the event of someone plugging something in, basically what it will do is we'll cut the ports to stop them from basically broadcasting round and round and round till the switch collapses in a big heap. So this is just another tool, right? Another real big thing that in this type of environment, I mean, it applies to most installations, but a lot of the time you need to calculate the kind of PoE budget. And this is again, something that we get asked quite a bit about, right? And PoE calculation, there's a few different ways of looking at PoE. By the way, we have another podcast on PoE as well. So if you're interested in learning about PoE and the standard and about a little bit about how it works, then you can obviously listen to that one. It was in season 1. And with PoE, there's a classification, which is basically identifies this device that's going to draw this wattage from the device. And they often refer it to a PD, so a powered device. And this gives you when you look at, for example, a CCTV or a phone, right, it'll tell you that it's class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc.
Yeah, and check on the data sheet of the vendor, and you always find the class of the device. So with that number, you can calculate the wattage that you need on your power consumption.
But there is 2 different modes in Zyxel switches that allow you to utilize the switch much better with power management, right? So, for example, by default, our switches are in something called consumption mode, which draws the power based on what's actually the device is using. So, for example, it might say it's going to do 15.4 watts, but it only draws 9 watts. So it will only allocate 9 watts out of the budget, whereas with classification, it will allocate 15.4 watts or 30 watts based on the standard, or even 6 watts based on PoE++. So we have PoE, PoE Plus, and PoE++, which is 15.4 watts, 30 watts, and 60 watts per port. And depending on the classification of the device will depend where it sits in there. If the switch is in classification mode, a lot of the larger vendors, they only do classification mode, then they will allocate immediately that out of the budget rather than what is actually drawing. But the thing to remember about that also is that if you're going right up to the edge of the consumption, which is how much it's physically drawing, you should consider that there is sometimes a flexibility in the power draw. So, for example, when it boots up, it might be more when it boots to when it's actually on. A telephone, for example, some telephones, when they're on standby, they're using 8 or 9 watts, and when you pick them up to use them, using 10 or 11 watts. So they could be slightly different in kind of when it's being used versus when it's in standby as well.
Yeah, but also look at IP cameras. Yeah, if you're using outdoors, in the summer there's no heating required, but during the winter time you might need some extra power to heat up your camera. So there's a difference in the power consumption at that time. So you need to calculate that as well. Yeah. And talking about CCTV cameras, yeah, we have special switches available, the 1350 switch series, which can provide you some additional features that help you to deploy a CCTV camera network, especially if you want to watch everything that's happening in your warehouse. Then it provides you some additional tools that can help you to do a better CCTV deployment.
So what kind of features will we expect from that, Michel, like in the CCTV?
Yeah, the most obvious maybe that is quite familiar also with other brands you see is that we support extended range. That means that we're not supporting the PoE and the connectivity up to 100 meters, but we also support the connectivity to your camera up to 250 meters. So that gives you a much more flexibility where you want to put your cameras. Yeah, so that's one of the features. Another feature that we have is that we can check on the camera if it's still operating. And if the camera is failing, then we can do an automatic reboot to check if it's a software failure to reestablish the connectivity. So that's also a feature that we have, and that can save you a lot of money if you have the evidence or the footage of the incident that you otherwise missed on your camera stream.
So the feature where it's auto recovering, I think it's called PD recovery, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So this is also available in Nebula, and also available for some other switches outside of CCTV switch as well.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. On the GS2220, for instance, we have auto PD recovery as well, and then you can use that for this purpose as well. Yeah.
Excellent. Also, talking about the cable length, there are some features in Nebula as well that also can test the individual port and cable, so it can check the pinouts to make sure the cable's not damaged. It can estimate the line length as well. So if you feel that the delivery of is a bit hit and miss, or you've got some poor performance or random issues with the cabling or the device that's caused you to expect it, then it could be something wrong with the cabling. And within Nebula, you can actually check the cable pinouts and the estimated cable length of the cable as well. And also for fiber, you can also do fiber testing as well. So you can do that from within the panel remotely. So that's a really good, nice feature.
Yeah, and I think especially for this kind of scenario, when you deploy network in warehouses, then you see more and more the limitation of your cable length. Big, long warehouses, it's easy to exceed the 100 meters. So if there is some failure in your network, this is a great tool to see if your cabling is connected properly.
Yeah, I mean, this is an environment where camera cables get damaged quite regularly, right? So, and they can create very intermittent issues as well. So it's a good way of kind of fault finding very quickly as well. I mean, cable faults are very hard in some cases to find, and like I say, they can create some very intermittent issues. So another real nice feature that you can utilize as well is the topology view as well. So what's really nice about that is these types of environments like warehouses, unfortunately, they get very messy very quickly. So it's very hard to track down cables and what's plugged into what, even if it's a historical thing that you're taking over. And the nice thing about the topology view is that it can actually show you which port is plugged into which other switch or which other device, and actually give you a map, a visual view of how everything is connected without having to go and look for it in the nest of cables in the cabinet, right?
Yeah, and we recently updated the topology feature in Nebula, because before you only see the network devices, the active ones, but not the clients. But since a recent update, we also can see what kind of clients are connected and what kind of operating system they're using. So it gives you more and more information on what is connected into your network.
So I think that's quite a lot about switching, right? I mean, there's a lot more you could do with switching, a lot more we could talk about, right? I mean, in some scenarios, you might want to increase the bandwidth, and you could talk about multi-gig and stuff like that. And obviously, we could talk about the variance models with different PoE budgets. But what I would say is if you're really kind of stuck on this stuff, we've got obviously our own pre-sales team to help, and and also our post-sales team as well. So we have these guys in place to help as well.
But I think what everyone is looking for is how to deploy the Wi-Fi.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because in this case, security and switch are quite easy to deploy, and because it's quite straightforward. But I won't say the issues, but the challenging part is really the Wi-Fi.
Yes,
and maybe you can tell something about what kind of challenges we see often in these kind of scenarios.
So we've done a lot of warehousing of various different types. There's two distinct ones which were extremely difficult. One was a cold store with a chiller bay, and devices were going in and out from -40 to maybe 0 degrees, and then they had these devices on them and they were roaming. And then inside the cold store actually had all these racks that actually moved as well. They're all like on runners, electronic runners. So when the fork truck came up to them, it would put the location, and all of them would move. Even the content of the warehouse is extremely important to understand as well, because, for example, in this, it's frozen goods, and Wi-Fi does not like water, so therefore it makes a complete mess, as well as obviously not working as well under colder conditions, right? Another one was actually a guitar wire factory, and it's all metal. So again, another very challenging environment.
It's very challenging.
Yeah. So, and they had these aisles, or really close stacked aisles that were going down, and they needed to kind of wander around with the picking device, right? So they can be very challenging environments, and I think this is where Wi-Fi really, really struggles, or the deployment mechanism doesn't comply with kind of the normal rules. The other thing is the ceilings.
Yeah, definitely.
Most of the time they are super high. So
the aisles are long, the ceiling is high, so there's a lot of challenges there as well.
Yeah, and by the time the radio signal, if you put it right up at the top of a warehouse, by the time it gets to the ground, you've lost half the radio signal.
At least.
At least. In fact, sometimes even so far, right? And I've seen some pretty dodgy installations where they put bars hanging down with I've even seen one with a chain swinging in the air, right, with a cable. Yeah. I mean, I get why this happens, but it's very, very challenging. So the other part is when people put it on the side, right, where they put it on the wall, and if you're using a standard static antenna radio, then the problem here is that you're actually pumping the radio into thin air upwards, but not outwards into the area where you actually need the coverage. So again, another problem that takes place, right? So to combat this, we would use a different type of technology. So we have two different variants that would suit this scenario. So we have something called an optimized antenna, and the optimized antenna allows you to basically flip the antenna array sideways so it points outwards when the AP is wall mounted. And the other one is our smart antenna technology, where it allows us to adapt to the environment and kind of utilize, and it's called smart antenna for a reason, right? It's smart and it allocates a radio pattern per device. Sounds a little bit complicated, but what it actually does is deliver optimum conditions per device, even in really tough conditions.
Yeah, and you have a much longer coverage, a further coverage with the smart antenna, because it's picking up the client, and when the client moves away from the access point keeps on tracking him to make sure that he has Wi-Fi. Yeah? So smart antenna is a typical AP feature that we recommend for warehouse solutions.
Yeah, I think also because it works for any technology as well. So the previous generations of devices as well, a lot of the technologies like Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 7, they rely on the client also coming along with it as well. But we know from experience...
Yeah, especially the scanners. Yeah, they based on technology, maybe G standard or N standard. And then software doesn't help. So then with the smart antenna, then you have something independent that is building a better signal, and that helps a lot for the connectivity when using scanners with, let's say, old technology.
Yeah. So it's the go-to for us, right? If we're doing a warehouse or anything that's really complicated or something you can't control the environment of, then the smart antenna is the go-to technology to deliver, to give you the optimum conditions, right? If it's not going to work with smart antenna, then it's not going to work at all, right? So, and that's the kind of way we look at it. I mean, obviously, it means you have to apply a lot more access points if you don't use it, right? So it obviously can also reduce cost in these scenarios as well. The other element of this is that when you're delivering in a warehouse, a lot of the applications that are running on these types of devices also require roaming, which means that you need to really consider about how close the APs are to each other to offload and roam. Because in order to roam, you need to have overlap of the radio, right? So that it can go from one access point to another. And this means, carefully managing the channels if you're in real constraint. You might not necessarily need the bandwidth, so I would definitely consider using smaller widths in channel.
20 megahertz,
absolutely.
Preferably, especially for small data rates.
Yeah, so these devices are not often carrying a lot of data, but they need the reliability, so I would definitely consider stuff like that. Of course, if you're using Nebula and using our Pro features, we also have some functions that allow it to dynamically move the channel width by itself, part of a Wi-Fi health function, so it can monitor all these devices and give us an indication of which device is poor performance and which AP is having the issues with these devices. So that's quite a nice feature as well to kind of cover all those areas as well. Another thing that I would definitely consider is minimal use of SSIDs.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think we need to explain it a little bit, because people are sometimes asking me, does your AP support more than 8 or 16 SSIDs? And then I think this can't be the case, because you have to imagine if you have so many broadcasts on your AP, the Wi-Fi network will go so slow, because it is a sequential thing that they're doing. So it's broadcasting SSID 1 first, then 2, then 3. So if you are connected to SSID 1, you have to wait for all other 7 to pass by before you get new data. So the more SSIDs, the slower your network. So make sure that you reduce your SSIDs as much as you can.
Basically absorb something called airtime, right? So the use of airtime is really important, especially in these types of environments where you actually don't necessarily have so many devices, but you often have a lot of access points for coverage because the area is so
exactly
long. Yes. So this is really quite kind of key factor in this element.
What helps, of course, if you can authenticate maybe your device, maybe through their MAC address, to move them directly in the correct VLANing. So that helps also a lot to reduce the number of SSIDs, because then you can connect all your devices to the same SSID, but based on the MAC address it is pushed in the right VLAN. So also that can help you to reduce the number of SSIDs that you're broadcasting.
Also acts as a bit of a level of security as well, right?
Because, of course.
I mean, the idea is to try and, I mean, it is a bit of an overhead in administration, but actually, if you're operating in these environments, you probably want to keep it very clean and make sure what's on the network is your kit and only your kit.
Yeah.
You know, many times when I've been to warehouses, have caused problems with the network. It's often been caused by rogue devices, you know, like someone who's got the SSID and managed to go onto it and used it for their, you know, in their break times or whatever. So keeping control of that is also another element as well, right? It's quite an important factor. And I think if you are using all these together, then obviously use them in Nebula will give you an overview of what's going on. It gives you a utilization of the kind of how the access points are operating, and how the switches are working with the access points, and how the security is working as well. Of course, if you wanted to take it even further, like we mentioned the NIS2 or NIS2 directive, you could also apply security at the edge as well. So on the actual access points, in addition to that, right? So there are other elements as well that you could keep going and expanding on. But just to give you a kind of overview and area of that. So I think that's quite a lot of information to go over. Obviously, we could keep going. There's lots of different scenarios, different little tweaks and things you could do, right?
We have a lot of success stories on our website. So feel free to join our website and check on success stories. We have a lot of scenarios with successful deployments on warehouses, where you can see what kind of challenges those resellers had to overcome and what kind of products they were using. So also that might be really helpful in your offering when you come across to a warehouse deployment.
Yeah, I think one of the key things I would take away from this is that as a vendor, we've created the kind of end-to-end solution, right? So you can manage everything together. It's easily deployed in one central process and one central console. Even the VPN element, when it goes to another site, can be controlled as well through the same platform, and gives us a very good, clear overview of networking. In these types of environments, typically you wouldn't be able to see what's going on the switches very easily. I think Nebula gives you a very good view of all that kind of element, and you get to see the CCTV cameras, the phones, the tablets, and the devices that are actually in use, and actually be able to see and respond to them very quickly, right? And also, there are other features like Wi-Fi Aid, which allows you to even diagnose whether it actually got DHCP correctly, whether it's got access to the internet and various different things. So you can quickly diagnose a problem in this environment remotely. And these things often, these warehouses often work 24/7, right? So, So IT guy or IT manager, or even, yourselves, right? If you're managing a site like this, is very easy to kind of look at. And my experience from these types of sites is I often would have, in the past, would have had to visit them, right? If you're speccing one of these projects, though, and you need help speccing the project, we have pre-sales teams in most regions, and we have post-sales as well, right? So we have also the expertise in-house to help you with the deployment and help you guide you through the products and selection. There are lots of variables in picking the product for your environment, but this kind of gives you a good overview. I think so. Anyway, is there anything else you think we should add?
Yeah, I think we covered the most of things that we would like to address, and to help you as a listener to do a proper deployment on network in a warehouse. So I think let's round it up, and hopefully we meet each other again on the next podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much for listening. I hope it's been very useful information, and we'll see you on the next podcast.